I'm 28F and until recently was engaged to Jake, 30M. We've been together for 3 years and got engaged 6 months ago. Jake is everything you'd want in a partner. Charming, successful, generous, and he seemed to genuinely love me and my family. Jake works in commercial real estate and makes really good money. He's always been incredibly generous with my family, which I appreciated because we're not wealthy by any means. My parents are both teachers and money has always been tight in our household. When Jake and I started getting serious, he began including my family in everything. He'd take my parents out to expensive dinners, buy thoughtful gifts for birthdays and holidays, and even help my younger brother Tyler with his college tuition when my parents were struggling to cover it. My family absolutely adored Jake. My mom would constantly tell me how lucky I was to find someone so wonderful. My dad, who's usually pretty reserved with my boyfriends, would spend hours talking to Jake about sports and work. Even my grandmother, who's notoriously difficult to please, would light up whenever Jake visited. The engagement happened last October during a weekend trip to the mountains. Jake had planned this elaborate proposal with photographers hidden in the trees and my whole family waiting at the cabin to celebrate afterward. It was like something out of a movie, and I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Planning the wedding had been going smoothly. We'd set the date for this coming September and had already booked the venue, caterer, and photographer. Jake was involved in every decision and seemed just as excited as I was about our future together. My family's excitement about the wedding was almost overwhelming. My mom had basically taken over as the unofficial wedding coordinator, constantly calling venues and vendors to make sure everything was perfect. My dad kept talking about how proud he was to walk me down the aisle to marry such a good man. The person who seemed most excited about Jake joining our family was my cousin Rachel. Rachel is 25 and has always been the attention seeker in our family. She's beautiful, outgoing, and has this way of making every conversation about herself. Rachel and I have a complicated history. Growing up, she was always the one getting praised for her looks and personality, while I was the quiet, studious one. Our grandmother constantly compared us, usually not in my favor. Rachel seemed to enjoy the comparisons and would often make little comments designed to make me feel insecure. As adults, Rachel had calmed down somewhat, but she still had this habit of flirting with any guy I was dating. She'd claim it was just her personality and that she was naturally friendly, but it always felt deliberate to me. When I started dating Jake, Rachel was immediately interested in him. She'd always find reasons to be around when he visited, would text him directly instead of going through me, and would constantly compliment him in ways that felt inappropriate. I'd mentioned this to Jake a few times, but he'd brush it off, saying Rachel was just being friendly and that I was overthinking it. He said he had no interest in Rachel and that I had nothing to worry about. I tried to believe him, but something about their interactions always made me uncomfortable. Rachel would touch his arm when she talked to him, laugh too loudly at his jokes, and find excuses to be alone with him. The worst part was that my family seemed to encourage it. They'd invite Rachel to family dinners when Jake was there, and they'd all sit around laughing at her stories and jokes, while I felt like I was watching from the outside. 3 months ago, we threw our engagement party at my parents' house. It was supposed to be a celebration of Jake and me, but from the moment Rachel arrived, I could tell the dynamic was going to be off. Rachel showed up wearing a stunning red dress that was borderline inappropriate for an engagement party. It was low-cut, tight, and definitely designed to get attention. She'd done her hair and makeup like she was going to a photo shoot. My mom actually complimented Rachel's dress and said she looked beautiful, which stung because she'd barely mentioned how I looked in my own engagement party dress. The party was going well for the first hour or so. Jake was mingling with our guests, being charming and gracious as always. I was busy playing hostess, making sure everyone had drinks and food. But I started noticing that wherever I looked, Rachel seemed to be right next to Jake. She was constantly finding reasons to touch him, straightening his tie, brushing lint off his jacket, putting her hand on his chest when she laughed. At first, Jake seemed uncomfortable with the attention, gently moving away when Rachel got too close. But as the evening went on and people had more to drink, I noticed his resistance decreasing. About 2 hours into the party, I went into the kitchen to refill the appetizer trays. When I came back out to the living room, I couldn't find Jake anywhere. I asked my mom if she'd seen him, and she said she thought he'd gone outside to get some air. I walked out to the backyard and found Jake and Rachel on the back patio, standing very close together and talking in low voices. Rachel had her hand on Jake's arm, and they were both laughing about something. As I got closer, I could hear their conversation. Rachel was telling Jake how handsome he looked in his suit and how lucky I was to have him. Jake was telling Rachel how beautiful she looked and how he'd always thought she was the most attractive woman in our family. I stood there for a moment, not believing what I was hearing. My fiancé was telling my cousin that he thought she was more attractive than me at our own engagement party. Then Rachel said something that made my blood run cold. You know, if you ever get tired of the quiet type, I'm always available. Jake laughed and said, "That's good to know. Maybe we should get together sometime and talk about it." I must have made a noise because they both turned around and saw me standing there. The looks on their faces told me everything I needed to know. They knew they'd been caught doing something wrong. "How long have you been standing there?" Jake asked, trying to sound casual. "Long enough," I said. "What exactly were you two talking about?" Rachel immediately went into damage control mode. "We were just talking about the party and how nice everything looks. Jake was telling me how happy he is." "That's not what I heard," I said. "I heard you telling my fiancé that you're available if he gets tired of me." Rachel laughed like I was being ridiculous. "Oh my God, you're being so dramatic. We were just joking around." "It didn't sound like joking to me," I said, looking at Jake. "Were you joking when you said Rachel was the most attractive woman in our family?" Jake got defensive immediately. "You're taking everything out of context. Rachel and I were just having a friendly conversation." "Friendly conversations don't involve discussing how available she is if you get tired of me." "You're being paranoid," Jake said, and I could tell he was getting angry. "Rachel is your cousin. She's practically family. I was just being nice to her." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jake was gaslighting me about what I'd literally just witnessed with my own eyes. "I know what I heard," I said, "and I know what I saw. You two were flirting, and it was completely inappropriate." Rachel stepped in again. "Honestly, you're being so jealous and insecure. Jake loves you. He's marrying you. Can't he be friendly with your family without you making it into something it's not?" The way she said it made me feel like I was crazy for being upset. But I knew what I'd seen and heard, and it was an innocent family conversation. "I think we should go home," I said to Jake. "We need to talk about this privately." Jake agreed, but I could tell he was annoyed with me. We said goodbye to our guests and drove home in complete silence. When we got to our apartment, Jake immediately went on the offensive. He said I'd embarrassed him in front of my family by making a scene over nothing. He said Rachel was just being friendly and that I was letting my insecurities ruin our engagement party. "She literally told you she was available if you got tired of me," I said. "How is that friendly?" "She was obviously joking," Jake said. "You're being ridiculous. And what about you telling her she was the most attractive woman in our family? Was that a joke too?" Jake got quiet for a moment, then said, "I was just trying to make her feel good about herself. She seemed insecure about her appearance." Rachel has never been insecure about her appearance a day in her life. And why would you need to make her feel good about herself at our engagement party? We argued for another hour, but Jake refused to acknowledge that anything inappropriate had happened. He kept insisting that I was overreacting and that my jealousy was going to ruin our relationship. Finally, I told Jake that I needed some time to think about things. I said I was going to stay at my friend's house for a few days to clear my head. Jake seemed relieved that I was leaving, which should have been another red flag. Instead of fighting for our relationship or trying to work things out, he was happy to see me go. I packed a bag and drove to my friend Sarah's apartment. Sarah had been at the engagement party and had seen some of the interactions between Jake and Rachel. She agreed that their behavior had been inappropriate and that I wasn't overreacting. I spent 3 days at Sarah's house, expecting Jake to call or text to apologize and ask me to come home. But I didn't hear from him at all. On the 4th day, I decided to go back to our apartment to talk to Jake and try to work things out. When I got there, the apartment was empty. Jake's clothes were gone, his personal belongings were packed up, and there was no sign that he'd been there recently. I called Jake's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted him asking where he was and what was happening, but I got no response. I called his office, and his assistant said he'd taken a leave of absence and wasn't expected back for several weeks. When I asked if she knew how to reach him, she said he'd left instructions not to give out his contact information. Jake had completely disappeared from my life without any explanation or conversation about our relationship. I was devastated and confused. We'd had a fight, but it hadn't seemed like something that would end our engagement. I couldn't understand how Jake could just vanish without even attempting to work things out. I called my parents to tell them what had happened, expecting them to be supportive and help me figure out what to do next. Instead, my mom's first question was, "What did you do to make him leave?" I was shocked. "What do you mean, what did I do?" He was flirting with Rachel at our engagement party, and when I confronted him about it, he left. "Honey, Rachel told us what really happened. You made a huge scene over nothing and embarrassed Jake in front of everyone. He was just being polite to Rachel, and you accused him of cheating." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, I saw them together. I heard their conversation. It wasn't innocent. Rachel said you misheard what they were saying because you'd been drinking. She said you were looking for problems where there weren't any." I wasn't drunk and I didn't misunderstand anything. Jake told Rachel she was the most attractive woman in our family, and she told him she was available if he got tired of me. My mom sighed like I was being difficult. Sweetheart, I think you need to really examine your behavior here. Jake is a wonderful man who loves you and has been nothing but good to our family. If he felt like he needed to leave, maybe you should think about what you did to push him away. I was stunned that my own mother was taking Jake's side over mine. I'd expected her to be angry on my behalf and help me figure out how to contact Jake. My dad was even worse. When I called him separately, he said he was disappointed in me for driving away the best thing that had ever happened to me. Jake has been like a son to us, he said. He's helped Tyler with college, he's taken care of us, and he's treated you like a princess. And you threw it all away because you got jealous of Rachel. I didn't throw anything away, I said. Jake disappeared without even trying to work things out. Maybe he realized that if you don't trust him enough to let him have a conversation with your cousin, the relationship isn't going to work. I felt like I was living in an alternate reality, where everyone had forgotten what actually happened at the engagement party. Update: 2 weeks later. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare. I kept hoping Jake would contact me, and we could work things out, but he remained completely unreachable. His phone went straight to voicemail, and his friends claimed they hadn't heard from him. Meanwhile, my family's reaction got worse instead of better. Instead of supporting me through what should have been a difficult time, they seemed angry with me for ruining things with Jake. My mom called me every few days to ask if I'd heard from Jake and to suggest ways I could apologize and get him back. She kept saying things like, Jake is probably just hurt and needs time to heal from what you did to him. The worst part was that Rachel had apparently become the family hero for trying to help at the engagement party. According to my family, Rachel had been making an effort to get to know Jake better because she cared about my happiness, and I'd misinterpreted her kindness as flirtation. Rachel was also telling everyone that she'd tried to defend me to Jake after I left the party, but that Jake was too hurt by my accusations to listen. She was positioning herself as the peacemaker who tried to save my relationship. My grandmother called to tell me that Rachel was a sweet girl who was just trying to be welcoming, and that I should be grateful to have such a caring cousin. She said I owed Rachel an apology for accusing her of inappropriate behavior. Even my brother Tyler, whose college tuition Jake had helped pay for, was taking Jake's side. Jake has done so much for our family, Tyler said. Why would you sabotage your own relationship over something so stupid? I felt completely alone and started to question my own memory of what had happened at the engagement party. Everyone I trusted was telling me that I'd misunderstood the situation, and I began to wonder if maybe I really had overreacted. But then Sarah reminded me that she'd been there and had seen the same inappropriate behavior I'd witnessed. You know what you saw, she said. Don't let them gaslight you into thinking you imagined it. Sarah also pointed out something that I hadn't considered. Jake's reaction to being caught was to completely disappear rather than try to explain or work things out. If he really hadn't done anything wrong, she said, wouldn't he want to clear things up instead of running away? About 3 weeks after Jake disappeared, I finally got some information about where he'd gone. A mutual friend told me that Jake had been posting on social media, but it looked like he'd blocked me from seeing his accounts. Apparently, he was posting from his family's vacation house in Florida and wasn't planning to come back for several more weeks. The fact that Jake was actively posting but had blocked me from seeing his accounts made it clear that his disappearance was deliberate. He wasn't having some kind of breakdown or emergency. He was actively choosing to avoid me. I decided to try one more time to reach out to him. I sent an email to his personal account asking him to please talk to me so we could work things out. I said I was willing to discuss what had happened and find a way forward together. Jake responded 2 days later with a short email that basically ended our relationship. He said that he'd realized we weren't compatible and that the engagement had been a mistake. He said he was sorry for any hurt he'd caused, but that he thought it was best if we both moved on. There was no mention of the incident with Rachel, no acknowledgement of the 3 years we'd spent together, and no discussion of working things out. It was like our entire relationship had meant nothing to him. I was heartbroken, but I was also angry. Jake was ending our engagement over email without even giving me a chance to talk to him in person. When I told my family about Jake's email, their reaction was predictable. Instead of being outraged that Jake had treated me so poorly, they seemed relieved that he'd finally contacted me. At least now you have closure, my mom said. Maybe you can learn from this experience and do better in your next relationship. My dad was more direct. This is what happens when you let jealousy and insecurity control your behavior. You drove away a good man, and now you have to live with the consequences. I couldn't believe that my own parents were blaming me for Jake's decision to abandon our relationship without any real conversation or effort to work things out. Update: 1 month later. A month after Jake's disappearing act, I thought things couldn't get any worse. Then I found out what had really been going on. Sarah had stayed in touch with some people who'd been at the engagement party, and she started hearing rumors about Jake and Rachel. Apparently, several guests had noticed their inappropriate behavior throughout the evening, not just during the conversation I'd witnessed. One friend told Sarah that she'd seen Jake and Rachel talking privately multiple times during the party, always standing closer than seemed appropriate. Another said they'd witnessed Jake whispering something in Rachel's ear that made her laugh and blush. Most concerning was the information Sarah got from her boyfriend, who'd been smoking outside during the party. He said he'd seen Jake and Rachel together on the side of the house, away from the other guests, and that they'd been standing very close together for several minutes before I'd found them on the patio. It was becoming clear that the conversation I'd overheard wasn't an isolated incident. Jake and Rachel had been flirting throughout the entire party. With this information, I decided to confront Rachel directly. I called her and asked if we could meet for coffee to talk about what had happened at the engagement party. Rachel agreed, probably thinking she could continue to convince me that I'd misunderstood everything. When we met, I told Rachel that I knew she and Jake had been flirting throughout the entire party, not just during the conversation I'd overheard. I said I had witnesses who'd seen them spending time alone together and acting inappropriately. Rachel's confident demeanor immediately changed. She got defensive and started making excuses about why she'd been talking to Jake. I was just trying to get to know him better because he's going to be part of the family, she said. I wanted to make sure he was good enough for you. By flirting with him and telling him you were available? That's not what happened, Rachel said, but she wouldn't make eye contact with me. I pressed her for more details about their interactions, and eventually Rachel's story started falling apart. She kept changing her explanation about why they'd been talking privately so much during the party. Finally, I decided to be direct. Rachel, are you and Jake in contact with each other now? Rachel hesitated for too long before answering, which told me everything I needed to know. We've texted a few times, she said finally. He's been really upset about your breakup, and I've been trying to help him process what happened. I was furious. You've been talking to my ex-fiancé behind my back? It's not like that, Rachel said quickly. He reached out to me because he needed someone to talk to. I was just being supportive. Supportive of him, not me. Your own cousin. Rachel got angry then. Maybe if you hadn't been so paranoid and jealous, none of this would have happened. Jake is a good guy, and you ruined things with him because you couldn't handle him being friendly with other people. The conversation devolved from there, with Rachel continuing to insist that I'd overreacted and that my behavior had driven Jake away. But I'd heard enough to confirm what I'd suspected. Rachel and Jake had been inappropriate with each other at the engagement party, and they were now in contact with each other after he'd ghosted me. When I told my family about my conversation with Rachel, their reaction was infuriating. Instead of being angry that Rachel had been talking to Jake behind my back, they seemed to think it was sweet that she was trying to help him through our breakup. Rachel has always been empathetic, my mom said. It's nice that she's checking on Jake to make sure he's okay. She's talking to my ex-fiancé behind my back after flirting with him at our engagement party, I said. How is that being empathetic to me? You're being dramatic again, my dad said. Rachel is just trying to help everyone heal from this situation. I realized that no matter what evidence I presented, my family was going to continue taking Rachel and Jake's side over mine. They'd apparently decided that I was the villain in this story, and nothing I said was going to change their minds. Final update, 6 months later. 6 months after Jake disappeared from my life, I finally learned the truth about what had been happening behind my back. Sarah's boyfriend, who works in the same industry as Jake, heard through professional contacts that Jake had been seen around town with a young woman who matched Rachel's description. When Sarah told me this, I knew I had to find out for sure what was going on. I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator to find out if Jake and Rachel were seeing each other. The investigator's report was devastating, but not surprising. Through surveillance over several weeks, Jake and Rachel had been documented meeting regularly since shortly after he disappeared. They'd been seen at restaurants, bars, and events around the city. The investigator had photos of them holding hands, kissing, and generally acting like a couple. Most painful was the timeline the investigator established. Based on witness interviews and surveillance of their regular meeting spots, it appeared that Jake and Rachel had likely been meeting secretly even before the engagement party. Their flirtation that night hadn't been spontaneous. It had been the continuation of an ongoing relationship. The investigator also discovered that Jake had never actually left town after our fight. He'd been staying at a hotel downtown for the first week, then had moved in with Rachel at her apartment. Jake's story about needing time to think and going to his family's house in Florida had been completely fabricated. He'd been living with Rachel the entire time while ignoring my attempts to contact him. I felt sick reading the investigator's report. Not only had Jake been cheating on me with my cousin, but my entire family had been helping them cover it up by making me feel like I was crazy for suspecting something was wrong. Armed with the investigator's evidence, I decided to confront my family one more time. I called a family meeting and presented them with the photos and timeline that proved Jake and Rachel had been having an affair. My family's reaction was not what I expected. Instead of being angry at Jake and Rachel for lying to them, they seemed angry at me for hiring a private investigator. This is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior that drove Jake away in the first place. My mom said, looking at the photos like they were evidence of my mental instability rather than proof of the affair. My dad was even worse. You hired a stranger to spy on Rachel and Jake? That's completely inappropriate. They've been lying to all of us, I said. Jake didn't leave because I was paranoid. He left because he was already cheating on me with Rachel. My grandmother, who'd been quiet during the whole presentation, finally spoke up. Well, maybe they're good for each other. Rachel has always been more outgoing than you, and Jake is such a charming man. Perhaps this is how things were meant to work out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own family was not only refusing to condemn Jake and Rachel for their affair, they were actually suggesting that maybe Jake and Rachel were a better match than Jake and I had been. So you're okay with Rachel stealing my fiancé? I asked. Nobody stole anybody, my mom said. Relationships end sometimes. If Jake is happier with Rachel, then maybe that's what's best for everyone. Tyler, who'd been quiet during most of the conversation, finally spoke up. Look, I know this sucks for you, but Jake helped pay for my college. He's been good to our family. Maybe you should just be happy that he's still going to be part of our lives, even if it's not the way you planned. That's when I realized what had really been happening. My family's loyalty to Jake wasn't about them believing Rachel's lies or thinking I'd overreacted. It was about money. Jake had been financially supporting various members of my family for years. He'd helped Tyler with college, paid for expensive dinners and gifts, and had even helped my parents with some home repairs. My family was more concerned about maintaining their relationship with Jake's wallet than they were about supporting me. So you're choosing Jake's money over your own daughter and niece? I asked. My parents looked uncomfortable, but they didn't deny it. Jake has been very generous to our family, my dad said. We don't want to lose that relationship because of personal drama. I was devastated to realize that my own family valued Jake's financial contributions more than my emotional well-being or the principle of basic loyalty. I left the family meeting that day knowing that my relationship with my parents and extended family was probably permanently damaged. They'd made it clear that they were going to continue having a relationship with Jake and Rachel, regardless of how that made me feel. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing about Jake and Rachel's relationship becoming more public. They were attending family events together, and my relatives were posting photos of them on social media as if they were just another happy couple. The final blow came when my mom called to tell me that Jake and Rachel were planning to get married. Apparently, Jake had proposed to Rachel just 8 months after disappearing from my life, and my family was thrilled about the engagement. We wanted you to hear it from us rather than seeing it on social media, my mom said, as if that made the situation any less painful. You're going to their wedding? I asked. Of course we are, my mom said. Rachel is family, and Jake is like a son to us. We want to celebrate their happiness. That conversation was the last straw for me. I realized that my family had chosen sides, and they hadn't chosen mine. I decided to cut contact with my family entirely. I blocked them on social media, changed my phone number, and moved to a different city where I could start over without constant reminders of their betrayal. It's been 6 months since I moved away, and I'm slowly starting to rebuild my life. I'm in therapy to process the trauma of losing not just my fiancé, but my entire family in the span of a few months. My therapist has helped me understand that my family's behavior says more about their character than it does about mine. She's also helped me see that Jake's decision to cheat and disappear rather than work through our problems showed that he was never the person I thought he was. The hardest part has been accepting that the people I trusted most in the world were willing to sacrifice my happiness for financial security and social convenience. My family chose to preserve their relationship with Jake rather than support me through the most difficult period of my life. I've started dating again, and I'm learning to trust my instincts about people's behavior rather than second-guessing myself when others try to gaslight me. The experience with Jake and Rachel taught me that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them the first time. I still get updates about my family through mutual friends. Jake and Rachel got married 3 months ago in a ceremony that my entire family attended. They're apparently very happy together, and Jake continues to be generous with financial support for my relatives. Part of me wonders if I made the right choice by cutting contact with my family. Maybe I should have tried harder to maintain those relationships despite their betrayal. But I know that I couldn't continue to have a relationship with people who were willing to sacrifice my emotional well-being for their own convenience. I deserved better than being gaslit and abandoned when I needed support the most. I'm building a new life with new friends who actually care about my happiness. I'm learning that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about people who support you and have your back when things get difficult. Sometimes I miss my old life and the family relationships I used to have. But I don't miss the constant feeling of being wrong about my own experiences or having to pretend that betrayal is acceptable because it's financially convenient. Jake and Rachel deserve each other. They're both people who are willing to lie and manipulate to get what they want, regardless of who gets hurt in the process. My family deserves whatever consequences come from choosing money and convenience over integrity and loyalty. I'm finally at peace with my decision to walk away from all of them. I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people who don't actually care about me. And I'm not alone anymore. I'm building relationships with people who value honesty and loyalty as much as I do. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who claim to love you. But it also taught me that I'm strong enough to start over and build a better life, even when it means losing everything I thought I wanted.